No Direction presents our GenCon 2013 coverage, Paizo Publishing's Emerald Spire All-Stars, featuring Ed Greenwood, Frank Mentzer, Richard Baker, Wolfgang Baur, Mike Stackpole, Jordan Weisman, Chris Pramas, Lisa Stevens, Erik Mona, F. Wesley Schneider, James Jacobs, Jason Bulmahn, Sean K. Reynolds, and Nick Logue, with special thanks to our GenCon correspondent, Michelle Lepage. Our GenCon 2013 coverage is brought to you by Chimera Games.
So hi everybody, welcome to the Emerald Spire All-Stars panel. I'm Erik Mona. I am the publisher at Paizo Publishing. This panel is really about a project that is still in the works. A few months back, Goblin Works, our partner on the Pathfinder online MMO, put together a Kickstarter to raise money and to get the fans involved in the creation of that game. And one of the benefits of the Kickstarter is a super dungeon called the Emerald Spire. The Emerald Spire is a giant ancient Aslanti edifice in the River Kingdoms where the game is based. And we thought it would be really cool to get together a all-star group of designers to take on the challenge. And so all of us at Paizo kind of contacted all of our friends in the industry and people we work with and admire and asked them to participate in this endeavor with us. And so everybody up here on this stage is an author in the Emerald Spire super module. That will be coming out next year's GenCon. It's going to be a hardcover.
7,000 pages.
It's like 1,000 pages.
It's complex.
We're all carefully arranged in the order of our levels. Well, no, we're
not. Each of us is asked to design a 5,000-word dungeon, which my fellow panelists can tell you is a little more challenging than it initially sounds. Especially because all of our dungeons are meant to fit on a single side of a flip map. So we'll also be releasing a set of flip maps. So there will be a miniature scale map of all of our dungeon levels that you'll be able to get at the same time as the hardcover book. What I'd like to do is ask my fellow panelists, starting to my left and winding all the way back around clockwise, to introduce themselves and talk a little bit about the level of the dungeon that they've done and who they are and what they've done in the past that you might recognize. And then also just a little thoughts on dungeon creation in general. Everyone up here was invited to the project because we've worked with them or we've read their stuff in the past and have been really impressed with their take on adventure design. Actually, just speaking as someone who grew up as a fan of this, I'm humbled to be on the panel with a lot of these folks, in fact, with all of these folks. So there's a lot of wisdom here, and I don't want to speak with much more preamble. We'll let everybody talk about their level and their best tips for dungeon design, and then we'll open it up.
Do we want to make one quick announcement also just about the two gentlemen down there? And
with a project that's got as many authors and as many very busy, high-profile gaming people involved, it's perhaps inevitable that a couple of the original authors were unable to finish their stuff. So we have replaced a couple of our authors, and we added 2 new authors to the Emerald Spire, 2 people that we've worked with at Paizo and that you guys, many of you probably know, and that's Nick Logue down here and Tim Hitchcock. Yeah, let's do quick introductions and then we'll go through and do all the tips and talk about our levels if that works. So that way you know who we are.
I want to talk to Nick about Razor Coast.
I know the history.
And then new people are arriving all the time. So we'll start with introductions to my left here with Chris.
And see, it's not that Wolfgang is already on it. It's that if you walk in the door, we will put you on.
Yeah, it's right. The next person who walks in gets to do a level. Because it was due 2 months ago. So,
there's your maps tomorrow.
All right. Chris. I'm Chris Pramas. I'm the founder and president of Greenwood Publishing.
And I'm Ed Greenwood. I created the Forgotten Realms and have never been an employee of any game company at all.
I'm Frank Mentzer, best known, I guess, for D&D Redbox 1983 and the ensuing boom in there. I felt very honored to get joined in here.
I'm Keith Baker. I created the Eberron campaign setting.
I'm Tim Hitchcock, and I freelance for Paizo a lot.
Good stuff.
I'm Nick Logue, Cook Mountain Massacre, Crown of the Cobalt King type stuff.
A lot of fragile egos on this panel.
I'm Jason Bulmahn. I started playing with this man's red box.
Me too.
I'm ridiculously excited to be on a panel with him. And I'm the lead designer of Paizo. I designed Pathfinder.
You may have heard.
It's a little game.
I'm not going to top that. I'm Wolfgang Baur. I write for Paizo as a freelancer, things like Fortress of the Stone Giants and a piece of the upcoming Wrath of the Righteous.
Don't you also have a company?
Oh, and I have a company called Cobalt Press.
Just a little
tiny. What a few of these last night.
A tiny set of Warrens. Once a many.
Once a many. Lisa Stevens, CEO, Paizo Publishing. Yeah. I got started with the red box. Well, actually, I did play one game session with the white box. But
how many people on this panel started up?
Your
red box.
That's scary.
James? I'm James Sutter. I'm the senior editor and fiction editor at Paizo Publishing.
Yeah.
Hi, I'm Wesley Schneider. I'm the editor-in-chief at Paizo Publishing.
Not a bad panel. We probably will have a couple of other designers come in, and we'll introduce them as they go. So just again, each of us was tasked to do the level of this dungeon. We knew that it was designed by an ancient Aslanti wizard, and we knew how many words it had to be, and we knew we had to get a map in that would fit on a flip mat, and that is pretty much the guidelines we were given.
Actually, there was a little bit more.
Okay, well, Lisa, speak to what else they were.
So basically, we sat down. One of the things we wanted to do is we wanted to give a bit of a structure to the Emerald Spire. So we actually had a meeting. Rich Baker, who is from Goblin Works, who you guys might know Rich from his work with Forgotten Realms for Wizards and TSR before that. He works now at Goblin Works as a designer, but we kind of tasked him to help corral this whole thing together. He may pop in here at some point in this thing. But one of the things we decided to do is we wanted to give a little bit of an idea of structure. There's a number of factions that exist in this Emerald Spire, and different main characters that are in the thing, and we wanted to figure out what the levels were going to be that people will be writing. So there's a little bit of structure to that. We pretty much let people pitch their ideas about what they wanted to do, and then we took those and we sat down and said, okay, that sounds like it's about this level, this thing's not this level, and the employees here, unfortunately had to fill in the gaps or whatever, as it were, like, guess what, you're doing a 8th level dungeon.
Give them the exciting challenge.
Yeah, there you go. And by the way, it has to say there's troglodytes, or something, but it was kind of that loosey for in some ways. It's just sort of, but there was a little bit. We did try to figure out a basic storyline more than just.
So we knew where our level fit within the context of whose level was on top of ours, whose level was below ours, what level characters would be when they were adventuring in our level, and then, as Lisa said, a couple of different factions, sort of what faction is it associated with. But in terms of the actual execution of the dungeons themselves, one of the reasons we invited all these folks to participate is everyone brings to the project sort of their own style. We've got, everybody does different things, and we wanted this to be a showcase of a bunch of different approaches and stuff. Now in terms of the formatting, and it's going to look like a Pathfinder adventure, stat blocks will be all stat blocks you're used to and things like that, but each of us brings their own tricks to the table. And so with that in mind, I'd like to, starting with Chris, have each of the panelists talk a little bit about sort of their dungeon level. There'll be mild spoilers here. Let's not ruin anything. But really, it's up to you guys. And then let's do that. Let's talk about our levels first. Then we'll do a second round where we talk about sort of best.
I don't have a problem with spoilers here because you folks have given up precious part of your GenCon time to be here and join us about this. So I think you deserve a payoff.
Or an advantage if you're good players. So Chris, why don't you talk a little bit about your level at the Emerald Spire?
All right. So I did one of the mid-level levels, and it's revolves somewhat around serpent folk, which I thought would be a nice little nod to the start of Greenwood, which was the Freeport modules, and the Freeport has its own mythology of serpent folk. So I thought it would be fun to play with the Pathfinder version, which is a little different. And I also thought it would be fun to pull something in from a home campaign I've been running. I've got a 17-year-old stepdaughter, Kate, and I wanted her to get a feel of what old D&D was like, because she's done other gaming with us, but she never played AD&D. So I started running an AD&D campaign using the Salt Marsh modules and then other stuff that I modified. And as part of that, I created Demon Prince and he's moving the background and whatever. So I pitched the idea of that Demon Prince, which I thought was interesting. Too spoilery? Should I talk about the Demon Prince?
Feel free.
Yeah. So this Demon Prince named Croakoth the Awakener, and basically, the idea was that he looked at guys like Demogorgon, say, who had these worshippers, and looked for groups whose own gods were dead or in torpor or just didn't give a shit about them. And then he's trying to build his power base by getting worship. So in Galarian, if he could actually bring over the serpent folk who were waiting for their own god to come back, but he ain't there yet, if he could win them over, that would be a big advantage for him to get a lot of power. So that's sort of the idea behind the level. And because, it's physically constrained and also constrained with, XP and treasure and all that, I want to try to provide some ideas that would go beyond the level. So, you can take that cult and do other things with it in your campaign as well.
Ed, how about yours?
Okay, spoiler time. The Emerald Spire contains an Emerald Spire. And
You had to tell me.
yes, and I'm going to go further. As you go deeper physically in this dungeon, the dangers get greater. So I
I believe this is supposed to be saved for the tips.
Oh, sorry. Okay. So I had an upper level, which meant it was lesser in power and challenges. So I did what I always do. I said, oh, well, I can only use these monsters and they're fun, but they're not like totally evil. So I'll just fill this level with all sorts of dungeon dressing, dead adventurers and the stuff in their pockets and these broken things that they unaccountably dropped that you need desperately. And I wrote all that up and I said, okay, here, Rich, here it is. And he goes, 5,000 words, Ed. And I said, it was only 35,000, that's not bad. So he said, well, it's a pleasure working with someone so professional. And I said, don't worry, it'll be down to 5,000 tomorrow. So I cut the lizard out of it and give it back to him. There you go.
All righty. Frank, how about yours?
Well, I was honored that when Jason did Pathfinder, he latched onto a little bit of my basic expert companion, etc. line, where I think it was documented that for the first time I said, crunch the numbers. You can design for the party force, the party levels, and here's the math to do it. And now here that is an integral part, the budgeting that we use as designers. You can spend this much on treasures and this much on critters, etc., etc. So I feel like I really have part of a little tiny piece of the soul of Pathfinder here, came from a little bit of my humble works. But so being honored to join this, you should have seen the CC list on some of the emails. Oh my God, here. But since I remember when we found Ed, I seem to be literally grandfathered into this whole project. They gave me a decent amount of force to deal with. I think I'm level 4 in there. So you get the hang of the thing, you're working through 1, 2, and 3, and this isn't like old school levels where it's a sandwich and they're packed in. No, you go down through tunnels and who knows what, and eventually come upon this next new place, and that's the next level in the line, see? So it works out really cool. It gives us a lot of flexibility getting in and out, gives you flexibility on exploration, a lot of cool elements of this whole Emerald Spire concept. And as I understand it, it's part of this whole setting. So, you find the Spire itself, and that's the dungeon we'll publish, with all these levels. But it's a real big sandbox-style campaign hands you, the DMs, lots of tools here to just go whichever way your group prefers, which I'm big on that. Talk to your group, find out the style of play that works for you guys. Pardon the digression. But in my level, I'm pretty well known for breaking paradigms and leaving them in shreds everywhere I go. I want to push the envelope, do this sort of things. One of my bones to pick with Pathfinder is not enough experience for role playing and that side. But that's the toughest part of the game. What I came a real epiphany. You want to learn, brand new player, and next door they have these kids learning Pathfinder with a beginner box. Oh God, what a great setting. You go in there and the energy in these, 8, 10, 12-year-olds and learning for the first time just really warms my heart. But I wandered in there and to witness that and enjoy it. And I would prefer more role playing, so I'm going to be proposing later a supplement for how to play the role. But if you want to learn the game like they're doing, you need structured rules, right? Yeah, I mean, this blue sky stuff is all fine for philosophers and whatever, but you need a little groundwork and a little context to put that in. So my recommendation these days to folks is learn with Pathfinder Basic Box, seriously, because Wizards totally dropped the ball, so forget that. learn with the award-winning Pathfinder intro set. And once you got a handle on this, the game and the setting, and you got the spirit, then graduate to old school play. Okay, learn how to disregard rules for the sake of speed or quality of play.
Because I'm the DM, that's why.
So that's where I'm coming from, and in combining that philosophy with breaking paradigms, you get down to my level and you run it into Trugs, good old Trug, and it's Stink City and so forth. And they welcome you. And they assume that you're there to make sacrifices to their god, who lives in the third door over there. And you go in and you peek in, and here's this thing, which is the deity of these Trugs living on this level, and you're dealing with the stench, right, and getting used to it very little bit. And there's their homes, the Warrens off to the side. Oh God, we're not going in there. Concentrated stench, extra penalties, and there go everything. But you basically meet their god and have to figure out how to deal with it, because that's where all the treasure is. God has all the treasure. And they assume you're there to make sacrifices and then continue on, and they'll show you the exit. So you got choices. Can we deal with Trogs that are really out of the box here? They're nice guy Trogs, and they're inviting you to their homes and assuming you're going to pay tribute and move through like everybody else does, or do you bring down the system? Do you actually attack them and their deity and reap in all the loot if you take it that way? But then ramifications of that. So I'm throwing brain twisters and this and that. You just got used to the Spire, 3 levels of that, and you're settled into the routine, really enjoying the different styles, and then I throw this at you. Okay, welcome to level 4, and then on to the next thing. So that's, in essence, what's going on. Very few spoilers hidden there.
Keith, can you follow that?
I just got to say, I want to hear the story about how you found Ed. Because that sounds like a mysterious
it's this loony in the boonies of Canada, and he started submitting stuff to TSR, and it went for... The thing about Ed is that...
the pen out of the...
He joked about it, but yeah, he could knock out 30K in words, like that. And when I heard this 5,000 word setup, gee, I do introductions. The
hardest part was going under the word count.
Yeah,
it was.
Absolutely. And truth in advertising, I am not that top-notch with the Pathfinder details, so I rely on a lot of the excellent development people. The synergy of this project is killer, because you can bring in our styles, and we don't have to know all the ins and outs. They got folks who do, so it's going to be hardcore Pathfinder when you get to my level. It's just you got to think out of the box to succeed at my level. Okay, so a combination of both. I'm sorry. Step on your stuff.
So with mine, one of the things that is a critical part of Eberron to me, and just generally what interests me in fantasy, is essentially taking things like magic and saying, and if this really exists, if it's a reliable tool, how does it get worked into everyday life? And so for me, I look at it and say, this began as this ancient Aslanti sort of palace, essentially. I mean, you have this guy who's a sorcerer prince. And so, yes, he's going to have workshops, he's going to have dungeons, he's going to have things like that. But where does he just go when he wants to relax? And so I basically start my dungeon with the VIP lounge. This is just where he went to pass the time. His apprentices can go and get a massage. And the automaton staff of this, because I also like looking at golems and thinking about what do you do with that, and essentially saying, so here we have creatures who were created to serve, to do this thing, and over the course of 100,000 years, or however long the Spire has been about, 10,000. 10. Oh, wait, I gotta change everything now. Hang on. It's still good. That basically they evolve their own civilization, religion, and what do you find when you get there, and how do you deal with them, and how do you move on from there. So it was essentially just playing with the idea of this place is more than just a dungeon. At one point, it was somebody's home. And what are the amenities you might have and what might happen to those over the course of 10,000 years. So.
Right. Tim, you've been on this project for, what, how many days?
5.
5. So why don't you give us a spoiler-laden review?
Wes called me in, and I decided I want to do something that was really Galarian, because it's really what I write in, it's really what I do. Most people know me from my Pathfinder stuff, so I wanted to get into something that was reminiscent of maybe the smaller things that I do, the shorter ones that do with PFS. So 5,000 is good for me. I can crank that good because that's what we do with the PFS ones are short like that. So, and I also, coming into the project, I decided I wanted to do something, like I was coming into the Spire late, right? So, what I was talking to Wes about that. My level, I decided I wanted to do something with Grimlocks because I like them and they're cool because you can make everything dark and then the players have to fight in the dark, and the Grimlocks have no problem seeing them. So the concept was that these guys came in later as.
You're so mean. Good job.
Right. So my concept was that these guys came here and they somehow stumbled into the Spire, and Wes helped me with this a little bit because he had an idea that maybe they came with a leader or something like this, and we came up with this idea where the leader the Spire has all these teleported properties. The leader somehow got sucked into the Spire or teleported someplace, and now the Grimlocks believe that he's in the Spire, and so they kind of hang out to try to worship him. But this all started, I guess they had a character that's a devil or something that was there, and they were fighting with the devil, and the devil was the one that actually teleported him away. So they think he's in the Spire. Now the devil's not strong enough to deal with the Grimlocks, but they make good minions for him. And his purpose there is to kind of collect people and lead them in, and he's doing experiments to learn something that has to do with the Spire. And so the Grimlocks now become his minions, so the whole thing became kind of a trap-infested thing where they're just waiting in the dark to kill your characters with.
That's true.
That sounds awesome.
I just want to kill you.
The OGL expert in you must declare that you, of course, mean Morlocks and not Grimlocks.
Oh, yeah, right.
Anything else to add on your level, Tim?
That'll do it.
Okay. How about Nick?
Hey guys, I've been working on this for like 2 hours. So,
and it's all done.
I've got lots to share.
He's writing it now.
I'm real glad I came here because now after listening to Keith, I'm like, oh, okay, I'll change a lot of stuff. But there's a reason.
But you've only written 50,000 words so far, right?
Exactly, so I'm just going to cut it back. There's probably a reason. My brief time working with Wizards of the Coast, I was working on a lot of Eberron stuff and had the great pleasure of working with Keith on some things. I really dug the Eberron world as well. So there's probably a reason there was some overlap there. But what I'm kind of going for with my level is it's sort of the upper. It's also sort of entertainment level, but for like special guests and his pleasure gardens, pleasure palace kind of level near the top of it. And so what I've kind of done with it is like, there's not really monsters, because why? There's gonna be lots of monsters in the dungeon, right? So when you get up to there, I'm known for kind of doing, I don't know, gross and strange things. Is that right, Kat?
In real life.
Oh, we're talking about the adventure.
Yeah.
No, this is just my house. So no, what this basically is like there's all sorts of activities and sort of relaxing things that would be wonderful if you were like a screwed up Aslan Lich thing, but if you're like in a party of adventurers, none of it's going to be that pleasant for you.
Is there a servant walking around with a platter of like baby head cocktails?
Yeah, the only real monster so far in it is like a golem creature that's there to like assumes you're just friends of the Aslan Lich, and it's like kind of showing you around. It's like you'll definitely want to try this out, and you won't want to try any of it else. and the spoiler alert: the golem's overpowered and very insistent. That you enjoy the pleasure gardens of the Aslan Lich. So yeah, that's there's going to be.
You realize this is due Tuesday, right?
Yeah.
Okay, just to make sure.
Yeah, I'm working on it right now. I'm thinking, some people need pens and stuff to write. I just kind of do it.
That's right. Then you just
hope someone writes it down for me.
He's got a flash
mind meld.
Yeah,
the key is we just want to make sure that the Emerald Spire is a nice place to visit.
Right.
I mean,
very
very
accommodating levels.
Right? Like, you know, and those of you, I mean, I don't really do dungeons very often. Like, Crown of the Cobalt came like a weird thing for me. Like, I'm not a, if you ever read my stuff in Dungeon Magazine or a lot of stuff I've done for Paizo, most of the stuff I've done for them is sort of not very dungeon crawly. It tends to be weird. Like, I'm responsible for a lot of modules that didn't do real well. I'm the guy that writes the modules most of you don't like.
Not true.
But some of you really, really love. Yeah, like that's kind of what I became known for. So there's this will be a bit of a different take. There'll be some social element to it. You've got to kind of figure out how to deal with this golem who seems real nice, but absolutely insists that you be dismembered by all the fun things that are dismember you and drain your fluids and do other awful things to you in this pleasure garden. That's it.
All right. Jason.
So my level is adjacent to Chris's level, and him and I both got serpent folk to play with. My level contains their connection to the Darklands. It's how they got into the dungeon. They kind of tunneled in and were like, hey, what's this place? This place seems cool. Hey, look, there's all this magic. So they, the serpent folk on my level found the Emerald Spire, and there is a schism between in the serpent folk. Some want to use it to attempt to achieve glory and greatness and are siphoning off the magic to mutate their young, whereas the other ones are like, no, we don't want, that's not cool. So there's a schism. When the players get to the level, they can explore around and realize that there's a schism within these people. They can find and rescue the previous leader who's imprisoned, and maybe he'll work with them, or maybe he will bite them in the back later. So my level's a pretty straightforward dungeon basher fight with lots of probably fights that are too hard. But that's the player's problem. And there might be a two-headed serpent folk somewhere in there that's really, really nasty.
There might not. Might not.
No,
could be.
No, there is.
He's there.
So yeah, so lots of devious traps, cunning tricks, that sort of thing. I've got a rather cruel and unusual maze component to it because I love trying to find a way to make that terrible concept work in a role-playing game. So yeah, I'm really excited. It's been a blast putting this together, and I think you and I are going to need to conference our levels a little tighter, but yeah, we'll work on that.
I invited you out for drinks.
I know.
I just didn't come.
I think that's what developed a problem.
Yeah, no, it's true. Yeah.
Jason doesn't like drinking anymore.
No, I'm done with that.
Your birthday party is considered.
Yeah, that's true.
He's a teetotaler.
Yeah.
By that he wants the total.
All the tea and actuality scotch. All right, so that's me.
That's good. Well, dungeons. Dungeons are a place to do the looting and the tomb robbing. And to do the looting and the tomb robbing properly, you need to have a tomb level. And that's me. I decided that there was an evil high priestess who needed to be, entombed. And because it was 10,000 years ago and we needed to keep her locked away in the Emerald Spire basement, The tomb is warping time and space. Because, you know, super evil high priestess with semi-divine powers isn't the sort of thing that you can just casually murder and expect her not to come back. So, the challenge of this was, well, I wanted to have space warping and magic warping and trans-dimensional shifting and weird traps. Like non-Euclidean maps, right? That's what I really wanted.
It's hard to put it on a flip map.
It's so hard to put on a flip map. Oh my God. I'm putting it on a flip map and I'm like, Rich, can I have 2 flip maps? Can I have like a before and after flip map?
Can I cut my flip map up?
Yeah, can I cut the flip map up into, you know, 5-sided shapes that you can spin? And the answer was pretty much no. And I came up with what I thought were some fine solutions to completely melt the brains of the party mappers. And also to just make it, it feels a little to me like the first edition style tomb robbing. There are traps, there are automatons, there are summoned creatures. And all of that put together somehow fit on a flip map that still to me at its heart feels like, yeah, we could put this in Riley and it would fit in just fine.
So that's at what, like level 2 of the dungeon or something?
No, I think it's a
little
little deeper in the dungeon. I won't say just how far, but spoil the surprise.
So, being the CEO, and since I was the first person that got announced for this, I decided to grab the top level. Because, so one of the things we did with the Emerald Spire is that we actually, we have these pre-painted plastic miniatures that went in the Kickstarter too that we're doing with WizKids. And so one of the things we have to do is we have to make sure all those miniatures end up in the dungeon. And there was a couple of miniatures that I glommed onto because I thought, well, these fit together. There's a goblin on a goblin dog. There's a bugbear with a bow, and I think I actually used the automatons too in there. There's a little Emerald Spire automatons, which a lot of people use because they get spread throughout. There's a wizard named Clarkosh that's was actually in the Thornkeep book. That's where the original Emerald Spire write-up, which was about that much, was in the Thornkeep source book we did, and they mentioned this wizard Clarkosh from Numeria who came down to explore it, and that's about all we knew about him. And so Rich Baker actually did the Clarkosh level. And he actually did it first before any of us wrote our levels, and then he sent it on his level and said, here's what I did, by the way, here's this automate and stuff. And anyway, so I said, I want to do this, I want to do a first level, I want to focus on goblins. Because we love our goblins, and I have this goblin dog, and bugbear is related to goblins, so I'll grab him. And so I took mine's actually not even a dungeon level, it's the abandoned upper part of I call it the upper tower. So back in the old days of when the Aslanti renegades were living here, they found this spire sticking up and they built a tower up around it. And then the people back in Aslan said, screw that, we don't like you. You guys are over here building a power base. They came and pretty much decimated the tower. So the upper area is kind of this ruin with the spire sticking up through it. And there's not much, there's pretty much a first level, and then there's a little bit of a second level that's still left, and the rest of the tower is pretty much collapsed around it. So that was my area that I got to play around with. So it's the entrance into the dungeon. And one of the things I decided to do is I remember back, one of my favorite adventures of old was Dragon Mountain with the kobolds, and then, it was an adventure that made kobolds nasty. And, I wanted to try doing something like that with goblins, because goblins are squishy. And I wanted to make them a little tougher. So I came up with the idea that the Aslantes, when they came to settle here, they had some magic, and they had one magic thing they had was that at nighttime, if you had any light sources, it would basically illuminate just 5 feet away from you and wouldn't cast any more light outs than that. And that way, you could walk around, see where you're going, but you wouldn't wake anybody else up by putting light into rooms and stuff like that. Kind of makes sense to me. That they would, it was, they're civilized people. Yes. Well, when the whole thing got crashed down, the magic basically got stuck in night mode. Because of course they hack at night, right? You wouldn't try to do that. So the entire level is basically under this nighttime spell where you can only see 5 feet away from you, unless you can see in dark, of course, which goblins can. And so you have this kind of ruined area that you can basically only see a little bit ahead. So the goblins, it's their home territory. They know where they're going. There's rubble everywhere, so it's all rough terrain. So you're moving slow, and they're moving. They know exactly where they're going, so they don't have that problem. So they get to ignore the rough terrain. And so hopefully this is going to make these little buggers pretty nasty. There's a couple of them with goblin dogs. So their leader is this bugbear, Grolk. And what happened is he discovered the Emerald Spire upper area, and he really liked it. And there's a tribe of goblins nearby called the Bloodbriar goblins, and he recruited some of the young guys. So in the way old part history of the Emerald Spire and this whole area of Galarian, there was a thing called the Kingdom of Zog, and it was, I guess, a goblin kingdom that got pretty powerful until it got destroyed, of course. My kingdoms are wanted to. And so he filled the young goblins' heads with the idea of the resurgence of the Kingdom of Zog and got these young goblins to come and join up with him. And so that's who he has. And he was doing, he basically took this level over and everything's hunky-dory till Karkash came in from the very end. Basically, they tried to defend their home and he kicked their ass. And now they work for him grudgingly. And the goblin shaman that he brought with him is plotting against him and stuff like that. So there's lots of little intrigues there. The goblins don't like Karkash, but they're afraid of him. So, like Frank kind of mentioned, there's a little possibility to role play. You can go and kill goblins, or you can work with the goblins and try to get them on your side to go against Karkash. There's a little schism between them because there's a shaman and the bugbear. The bugbear is kind of a dictatorial kind of guy, but the shaman's got an ace up his sleeve that the bugbear doesn't know about. He's found an Emerald Spire automaton that got broken, and he just by tinkering around with it managed to reanimate it, but it's broken. And he calls it Clanky, and it walks around. It's only got one arm, and he's kind of attached a human bone arm onto it, and it kind of fritzes a lot, and it's his secret weapon though, because it still has some DR, so it's going to be kind of tough for first level characters to deal with, even a couple points of DR. But it's not very accurate, and like I said, it kind of fritzes in case he doesn't want to do what it wants to do. So anyways, it's kind of fun, and then the goblins are just goblins. They have crazy, silly things. I think one of my favorite pieces what I put in there was the bugbear had said you couldn't eat in the barracks area, the goblins, because they were all eating in there and it was starting to stink, and so, but someone stole a piece of cheese, a moldy piece of cheese that's starting to smell. But they're all afraid of what the bugbear is going to say, so they're passing it, hiding it on the other guy's beds, and they find it, and they take it to the next bed. And so they could just take it out of the room, because that would just be the smart thing to do, but they're goblins, and so they keep passing it off. And there's a lot of other little fun goblin things in there too. So anyway, it was a lot of fun to play around with, the goblins and make the first level kind of a little scary too on top of it, this darkness. So.
I think we probably could have just transcribed that and turned that into Lisa's level.
Well, that pretty much was 5,000 words, wasn't it?
Hey, I'm James. So I really love low-level play. Probably 90% of the games I've run over the course of my life have been like in that 1 to 3rd level range. So of course I'm writing one of the highest level levels in the dungeon, which is okay because I really love outsiders. And 2 of my favorites are Inevitables and Proteans, are sort of chaos and law elements. And so my level is the penultimate level. It's the last one, guarding the doors to whatever is beneath that is sort of the heart of the Emerald Spire. And so I thought it was really fun to play with those 2 factions because on the one hand you've got robots and on the other hand you've got chaos snakes. And the Proteans are desperately trying to open the doors and release whatever craziness lives below the spire. But then the inevitables are trying to keep them out, keep the doors shut, because they don't know what the proteans want down there. But it's never a good thing when chaos snakes get more power. So the party, when they show up, like everybody said, Frank and everyone has said that it's really fun when you have factions competing, and so the PCs will have to make some awkward choices between, well, the Proteans are happy to help you open the door and let you go to the lower level, but they don't have any good intentions for your world. And the inevitables are really trying to keep law and order, except that they don't want you to go through. So you're going to have to go through there, and of course the level has been warped by the people there, so the inevitable half has robot repair bays and lasers and things, and then the Protean half has floating islands and weird portals, and
it all fits on a flip map.
It all fits on a flip map.
That's interesting.
Yes. So yeah, that's me.
So we've got this dungeon that's about 10,000 years old, and we've talked about pleasure palaces and garrisons and defenses and so on and so forth. I can't even really keep my apartment in good shape for a month before things start going to pop. And this thing's been around for 10,000 years. So for my level, I decided to have a level that's been utterly ruined and has just largely been taken over by the wilderness that's been breaking down, just battering down the door, nature battering down the doors of this dungeon for centuries and centuries. The trick is that my level's about 10, 12, 13 levels underground. So in this case, the wilderness that's battering it down is eroding rocks and magma flows and so on and so forth. So the Emerald Spire has this elemental tie to it, and you'll see throughout the dungeon that there are a number of elemental monsters that keep coming back up, and it gets tied into the end of it more. So it's caused a number of lava flows and lava tubes and whatnot that are dormant in the area to kind of reactivate. And this whole level of whatever the dungeon used to be has largely been wiped out by a lava flow that passes through the area. I went a little self-indulgent with this because on one side,
all of us,
on a couple different angles here. One, because I'm a big video gamer, and in most adventure games, you've got the flying level, you've got the water level, and you've always the worst is the fire level. Because you've always got to jump over the lava pits or whatever have you. And normally if you fall, you just fall. But if you fall in the lava, back to start. So I wanted to do the super annoying, the super painful, the dreaded fire level. So on top of that, I'm responsible for some of the creepier parts of the campaign setting. In part, beside Ustalov and a lot of the gothic horror elements, I also like a lot of the evil outsiders. But also tied into that, I really like the Hell Knights. And I'm responsible for doing a lot of stuff with those guys.
And there's actually Hell Knights right near the Emerald Spire too.
Exactly. So we've got a Hell Knight faction out there. And the Emerald Spire is right around the corner. So it makes sense that they've been giving that thing the eye for a while. So what my level starts off with is that there's a party of Hell Knights. You're not the first adventurers to get down here. That the Hell Knights have managed to send a contingent. And they've gotten a good way through this thing down to about this level. And the level before me, which might be Chris's, ended up just beating the pants off of them. And they get into about my area, and that's what finishes them off. And the first thing that buzzes up to you is a few rooms ahead is pretty much the remains of these Hell Knights. And the only survivor is one of the Hell Knights, this Hell Knight signifiers, their leader, their spellcaster leaders, Familiar. The Familiar in this case is a chitin augur, which if you guys have ever seen the movie Phantasm, is essentially this ball of whirring blades and whatnot. And it just really wants to get out of there or have its master redeemed and whatnot. So the first thing that happens is this thing buzzes up to you. These things don't have language. So it like whizzes up to you and whatnot, and you've got to immediately try to take in what's happening here. So the level ends up not just being navigating the whole thing, but you end up trying to figure out what the Hell Knights were doing down here, you're finding the remains of them, and then you've also got this Titan Augur thing that's kind of, it's not attacking you, it's just kind of following you around, and it's even trying to determine whether it wants you to save its mistress when you actually do find her, or maybe if you happen to have a lawful evil character, or a lawful character, or someone with a familiar that, or yeah, just somebody with like a familiar that it doesn't like, that maybe it could kill and replace. It's got that kind of stalking you. And then there's also Magma Dragons.
So there's that. Just a spring plate on the top. Yeah. Just throw some of those in.
So I had kind of an interesting challenge with my level, which was to deal with the layer of the Lich who basically erected the Emerald Spire in the first place. The kind of precursor to the Emerald Spire project was the Thorn Keep source book that we did for the very first Kickstarter associated with Pathfinder Online. And that one, a few of us on the panel and otherwise wrote levels of a significantly smaller dungeon. And my level was the headquarters of the apprentices of the Aslanti arch-wizard Nur-Athamon, who was the guy who built the Emerald Spire. And the conceit of the level there was that at the moment of Nur-Athamon's defeat by the Aslanti, his apprentices tried to take advantage and betray him. But Nur-Athamon is a high-level Lich and is not betrayed so easily. So in order to basically curse the apprentices, he time-locked their entire level and they could never leave, and the player characters venture in there and so on. So I had already done some loose thinking about who Nur-Athamon was and kind of what he was up to in the area, because as Lisa had said, the original text on this dungeon was like smaller than a hand, so there really wasn't a lot of information. And one of the challenges that I had to figure out is, okay, so even an undead Lich, 10,000 years is an awful long time. What has he been up to for 10,000 years? And furthermore, why is he not, if he's a super powerful Lich, why is he not taken out, the entire region? Why is he not, have a direct presence more clearly felt on lots of the other levels of this dungeon? And just how does this make sense? And so
he lost his keys.
It's something like that. What I kind of developed was that the Nur-Athamon, all we really knew about Nur-Athamon is that he was interested in constructs. And that he was an Aslanti exile. And so what I put together was this story like Nur-Athamon back in the last days of the Empire of Aslan, where the factions were trying to strive for the throne in such a way that ultimately ended in the demise of that continent and what had been Galarian's first great human empire. He attempted to, he and his allies attempted to murder a bunch of the aristocracy and replace them with simulacra and constructs in an effort to support his bid for the Aslanti throne. And when that was discovered, the Aslanti didn't really care for that. So him being of noble blood, they were not able to just kill him outright like they did a lot of his followers. So they exiled him and many of his apprentices and followers and things across the seas to what would be the continent of Abyssan. It also helped me explain why there is an ancient Aslanti presence in a part of the world that was not really known for Aslanti conquest. So Nur-Athamon gets exiled there, and on the shores of the western Abyssan, and he and his followers start sort of learning from the native people of this great emerald crystal that's growing out of the ground irregularly many miles to the east. So he and his people sort of venture into the primeval forests of Abyssan and are not heard from again for quite some time. Then, as the empire back home is really starting to shake apart, the final emperor of Aslan orders the special knighthood called the Knights of the Western Star to track down all of the enemies of the Empire of Aslan and just kill them. They can't risk having anybody come back and topple the delicate political situation in the Empire. And soon enough, Narathimon's name comes up on that list. So they dispatch the knights, they travel, discover that, oh my god, not only has he's still alive, but he is thriving. He has built this glass structure around this Emerald Spire, and is obviously deriving some kind of terrible power from it. And so they go down, they find him in his lair, they kill him, but they're pretty sure that's not just going to do the trick, so they cast a mythic curse on the level, and Narathimon can never leave his lair, no matter what happens to him. So this poor bastard has been stuck in basically one room for 10,000 years. So what he has been doing over 10,000 years, as he in fact was a Lich and his phylactery has him regrow, he has been studying life itself. The Emerald Spire itself connects down into, and this is very spoilery, the very final level, which is done by James Jacobs. It's down in the Darklands in a vault of the lowest level of the Darklands called Orth. And in fact, it was created by this ancient mysterious race called the Vault Builders that we haven't really said that much about to date. But the Vault Builders opened these vast caverns far beneath the surface of Galarian and somewhat like Pellucidar. They could create a big dinosaur land or a big volcano area, or they just made their own sort of like ecosystems under the world for unknown purposes. And the key to that was this elemental crystal called, the this emerald crystal, and that's like filled with like creation magic. And so Narathimon's stuck in his lair in this room with each of our levels has a section of the Emerald Spire winding through it in some way. And so Narathimon's stuck in this room, and he had been a necromancer. But he started to realize that undeath was not really going to be the route ultimately to do that. And so he started, even before the Aslanti came to kill him, experimenting more with constructs and things. So all the emerald automatons that people have seen in their levels were actually created by Narathimon and his team. And so you're experiencing all this stuff as you get down, and finally you meet Narathimon. And in the 10,000 years since he's died, Narathimon has actually become more interested in life than he is interested in undeath. And so he is experimenting with shards of the Emerald Spire that he and his new apprentices have carved out of the spire, and they are embedding them into the carcasses, essentially, of the Gorgons and the, Abraxas cultists and things who served him and were murdered by the Knights of the Western Star. And this sort of fills them with animate force in a way they're sort of trapped between life and undeath. And in fact, he is hoping eventually to transcend undeath and become a living creature again. And in the meantime, he has taken the 20-foot diameter Emerald Spire in his level and carved it into an elaborate replica of the actual Aslanti throne. And he has been sitting there for quite some time. He probably has terrible hemorrhoids. And he has been creating a new aristocracy, a new emerald aristocracy made of the material of the Emerald Spire. And so when you get there, you basically get there on Coronation Day, as he is going to declare himself the new Emperor of Aslant. Little does he know, in fact, Aslant is gone and destroyed because he hasn't left his room for 10,000 years. So my level is all sort of his headquarters and all the various inner circle servitors of Narathimon himself. And that's basically about it. There's a shrine of Abraxas in there. You actually get an encounter where you go into his inner lair, Abraxas being the ancient demon prince of secrets. And Abraxas is kind of pissed because Narathimon hasn't talked to him for a long time and sort of abandoned his religion, so you can make a deal with Abraxas to kill Narathimon and he'll give you a wish. And all kinds of fun stuff. So that's kind of my level in a nutshell. I got a chance to playtest my level 3 times at PaizoCon and through one of the high-end backers of the Emerald Spire project, or the Pathfinder Online project, and so it's been great to sort of revise it with real in-play experience and make sure it's really solid and tight and somehow still coming under 5,000 words and you have to flip that. So that's kind of our overview of this. I think it'd be great if we could go one more round through the whole group and just kind of have each of us sort of give some tips and best practices when it comes to dungeon design, either related to our Emerald Spire levels or just in general. And then we've got a fair amount of time to talk about questions. We've got about an hour left in this seminar. So let's just give one good adventuring tip, or one good dungeon design tip from each of the panelists. Then we'll open it up for questions. Chris?
Oh,
yeah.
Tips. It's easy when you're dealing with a dungeon to think about it as this thing that's like locked away from the world. And you certainly can run kind of mega dungeon campaigns where really like that's the focus of it, and that's the campaign. I like to use more of the world myself, and so even if something is an ancient thing, like I like to see story stuff in the dungeon that leads outside the dungeon and leads to other adventures. And you don't need to know necessarily what those adventures actually are yet. I mean, essentially, I like to throw seeds in front of my players, and if they pick one up and want to go with it, then I'll be like, okay, I'll figure out what that is, And I think that dungeons are another fine place to basically seed adventures in other places, and maybe lead you to other dungeons or.
Okay.
Okay. I'm going to have to leave after this. I just got a text. No problem. That thing for somebody. Okay. Okay. My one tip would be, if you have space in your workout, but if you and whenever you're designing a dungeon, put in something that's left a little mysterious, a MacGuffin, if you want to call it that, but something about the dungeon design. It could be a portable item, but it's cooler if it's part of the dungeon. Whether it's a glyph or motif or whatever, that you don't entirely explain. Leave it mysterious, because the most brilliant players will figure out what it is, and they'll be so brilliant that they figured it out and that you thought of it, and it's just great. And they will be forever more invested in the adventure experience because of it.
Right. All right, Ed, thanks. How about a round of applause?
Not a general tip for adventure design, but more of a tip for DMing, especially in your home campaign, things like that. And only if you feel up to it. It requires a lot of prep. I do this all the time, been doing it since the 70s, but if every now and then you have this group of adventurers who have gone somewhere outdoors, down in a dungeon, whatever, to go beat up monsters and get their treasure, etc., the standard setup. What if they run into another adventuring party trying to do the same thing? It is hell trying to run an entire party by yourself, so be sure they're totally statted out that you've got some tactical combat procedures in mind if it hits the fan, and it can be avoided through role-playing or perhaps buying them off, or them buy. What if they're trying to buy your party off? No, don't go in this area, we want to go back there. But it opens up all these doors for adding new dimensions and more verisimilitude. That, in this world with all this treasure, sure, there's other people out looking for it. And so few dungeon masters that I run across anywhere in the world dare to go there. So if you think you're up to it, now come on, lay it on the table. We're all smarter than most of the folks out there who take up knitting and stuff. We have head games here. We have serious mental, you have serious mental skull power. Can you take it to that next level and add this level of complexity? So not for everybody, but try it sometime. You might like it. More importantly, maybe your players will like it, and that's what it's all about.
Just picking up on Ed's point about leaving something and seeing what the players do with it, I would also say don't feel bound by either what we've written or what you've come up with in the first place, in any place. What I really like about collaborative, about role-playing is that it is a collaborative story, and that the players will think of things I hadn't thought of or come to conclusions I hadn't come to. And I always want to be flexible. The players, again, see something, they say, oh my God, that's blank. And that's totally not what it is, but that's a great story. Well, I want to be prepared to, embrace that and move with it. And I guess to me, especially when dealing with published adventures as opposed to your own things, the key is always to look at them as a source of inspiration as opposed to a limitation on your story. And don't be afraid to make changes that again made the story more something you and your group are going to enjoy.
Come to these things and listen to all these people. That's my advice. That's what I stalk Nick Logue.
We all do, to be fair.
And I think when it comes to design, I like to just look at, I have said this before, just everything that goes on around me and see kind of how I'm exploring this world, like the real one, and I like try to put that into my game. And when I'm running stuff or designing something, like how I would be affected by that. Really try to put myself there and like, is this going to be fun? Is this going to suck? And when you need the fun, you put the fun in. When you need the suck, you put the suck in. And it works.
All right, Nick.
Great. Yeah, just
Everybody. Yeah, we threw Ed out, so you can sit in the middle.
Yeah, we made
You've forgotten Ralph's chairs.
Wait a second. You see you and Ed in the same place at the same time?
He's 10 years younger and far more handsome. I knew it.
Jason, don't expect that Rich is going to give you a back massage the way I.
Oh, come on. That does not surprise me at all.
a little bit of that. Oh, so a couple quick things, guys. I kind of came to this and working with all these fine, lovely people through my own background, which is theater. You know, why do we play these games in the first place? And there's lots of answers to that question. You know, sometimes we're playing and roll a bunch of dice and go, I did 245 points of damage, which feels great, right? There's that Fiero moment of I did that, yeah. But also, you know, these are stories. Like even if it's very segmented and in these turns and sort of, you know, these initiatives and who's moving where, moving what, and if it's very abstract and we're looking at it down from a minis board. I mean, it's always kind of useful to look at why we've told stories since before we were able to talk, yeah, as human beings and stuff. And I always like to talk about Greeks and the idea of catharsis and the idea of sort of confronting things we're afraid of and gaining new understanding of what they mean and why we're afraid of them and who we are and things. So it's one of the reasons I like to try to terrify players with a lot of what I do. It's not just because I'm a sick bastard.
Well, not just,
but really, you know, it's a wonderful environment to explore your fears. You have a character that's like an alibi, yeah. Like you're not actually there. You have this facsimile of yourself that you're playing, and we in theater love that, right? We love to play a role, play a part, because we can explore things well beyond our own experience, yeah. And so, always keep your eye on that ball when you're designing your adventures. What can you really question and confront and really make exciting and interesting in a new way for your players as they go through this experience? I mean, this is crazy stuff, right? So one real simple way to do it is any adventure that you're working with, whether you've designed it or we've designed it or someone else has designed it, make it feel kind of real. Yeah, I mean, like, you know, get into it. You know what I mean? Like I don't really sit when I run a game. I'm up. You know what I mean? And I want them. I don't want to give them a lot of chances to pull out of what's happening. I want them to kind of be more engaged to the point where they're going, oh my God, this is crazy. You know what I mean? Like I just put this axe in this thing. You know what I mean? Which is not often what we think about when we're playing these characters. So yeah, I do 20 damage. I cut the thing's cut off and move on to the next round. You know what I mean? But it's like that's nuts, right? So like none of us do that in real life, and there's reasons. Well, we hope. Right? And there's reasons we don't do it. There's reasons we don't do it in real life, but there's also reasons we enjoy doing it, you know, in these games, right? There's something about it that's cathartic and interesting to explore. So that's sort of something to keep in mind. And then also for yourself, it's more of a GM tip. Something that's really good is to kind of riff on what Keith said. Make sure that this adventure is for your players and also their characters. Like it's always great if you can drop things into pre-written modules that directly relate to every single character in your gaming group's story or background or interest in some way. Yeah, I'm a huge fan of that. I've never run a pre-written module ever, and I've never playtested anything I've written. You know what I mean? Like I don't do it. I don't even know the rules for most of the games that these guys know.
It's a terrible mistake.
But I mean, the reason being is that, I mean, the fun of it is like, and I think Tim nailed this too, is that these players come with their character and like they want something. Like they're there for something. Like I made this paladin and I want to channel goodness through me and destroy undead. And you got to give them an opportunity. You know what I mean? Like don't do what we wrote. screw that. Do what they want, yeah. And for some, it might just be a use of a power. For me, what always attracted me to back in, from Red Box on, from Frank's work on, was that I had this guy who could do this crazy thing that I could never do. You know what I mean? I can't stand up like ghouls came in the store right now. I would shit myself. But instead, I could go and then it would turn to dust. You know what I mean? I'd be like, and then, to be able to do that.
It's just vintage Nick.
Way to find out.
Let's bring on the ghouls. So make sure that you give them those moments. Yeah, that no matter what's written in the adventure, that you supply a chance for everyone to use the thing that they're really there to use. And if they're really into story games, if they're into the backstory of their character, seed that stuff in. Put their nemesis. If their village was burned down by some asshole, put that dude in the adventure, or some dude who works for that dude. Yeah, I mean, so that they can get angry and enjoy beating that guy's head in with their mace. Yeah, that's always fun.
Jason. So I'll give some advice on dungeons. This is a huge dungeon. And the first tip I want to give is when you get to Frank's level, if you see a golden dinner plate, don't pick it up. It's probably coated in yellow mold. You killed my first character that way. But no, dungeons are great. I always encourage people to use dungeons. I know some people shy away from it a bit, but the dungeon is one of the great social contracts of the fantasy game, right? The moment people step into a dungeon, there's certain rules. Everybody knows them, right? It's like, okay, we got to explore this level before we take the staircase. It doesn't matter if the staircase is in the first room. You don't take the staircase down until you do this level, because if you go down, it gets harder, right? I mean, everybody knows this. We're mapping and we've almost got this rectangular shape of a dungeon, but there's nothing in this corner. Well, let's go over to that corner and find out what's over there, because clearly there's a room there. And as a writer, as a game master, even as a player, it's good to embrace that, right? Play with that, but then turn it on its head, right? I threw this at Rich. I'm not sure if he's going to let me keep doing it, but you get to my level of the dungeon, and I think he's going to make me change it. But you can skip it. You can just go to the next level. The staircase going down is in the first room. Because the serpent folk are like, yeah, get out. We don't want you here. This is our thing. But I think it's fun sometimes to, understand what the constructs are of the game that we play, especially those social ones that are like, we can explore these dungeons, it's harder to go down, and all these, there's a ton of them, especially when you deal with dungeons. And using those in your game is something fun. It gives us all a touchstone to work with and build on going forward. Everybody's on the same page when you're in a dungeon. There's no disconnect. Everybody knows, they can picture what it is, they know what it is, they can work with it. And then when you break that really can drive home key and critical things you want to get with your dungeon. And I hope you'll see a bunch of that in Emerald Spire. It certainly sounds like it. I think with Wolfgang's, but you have to rip up the map and rotate it around or whatever it is you have to do.
The person on the other side.
That's right. Yeah. It's really bad for you. Fine. So that's fine.
I have a 1-minute spin-off on something he said. Sometimes suppose you're in a dungeon, you come up to this door and it's massively bound and it looks like it's got 6 keyholes on the thing and everybody immediately starts sweating bullets, right?
Trap.
Does anybody check the door? I've had characters come up and the thing is completely unlocked. You can go right through, but their assumptions are, this is locked, trapped out the wazoo. Actually, you got nothing. It is completely unlocked, and the thief, or the rogue rather, modern parlance, comes up and proceeds then to make his rolls and locks half of the locks. Right? Okay? And then it gets nuts from there. Break the paradigm, but use their assumptions and go from there. So go ahead, Wolf.
No, that's great. I unfortunately have to cut out to another panel after this, but I have one tip I really want to share, because I spent some time as a player recently, and it reminded me of the great importance of how you fulfill the other part of the social contract after the monsters are dead and the level's explored, namely, spend some time on your treasures. Now, as a game master, grudgingly putting stuff out there, it's like, all right, I guess you've earned it. There's a chest, there's gold in it. Yeah, I used to take that sort of attitude with treasures. I don't want to give out too much. I was very miserly. Well, the way I found around that was make the presentation of the treasure like one of the rewards, like you've killed the big bad. Moment of triumph. Nick Logue style. Moment of triumph! And then what else? Well, the players are all thinking, loot the bodies, loot the bodies, loot the bodies. And they're hoping it's cool, right? It's part of the dungeon experience that we don't know what the treasure is. We hope it looks cool. We hope the rules are cool. We hope it powers us up. We hope we're rich.
14 copper.
Yeah, 14 copper. Once in a while, you should totally break the paradigm and give them 14 copper on the 12th level.
I was thinking 14 electro for that. I'm old school.
But
it's 44, so.
Your players will love you if, you describe the Lich King's wand when they finally bump them off in a little bit of detail and tell them, yeah, it hints at this power and that power and that power. I mean, really, spend some time on the treasure. I think it's a somewhat neglected aspect of dungeon design.
Well, it's easier to not go overboard when you're given a strict treasure limit.
Yeah.
I have found that.
It was hard for me. I was like, really? Is that all?
It was. Yeah, it's tough. That was the hardest part.
You can still say it's room encrusted, even if it doesn't do squat.
That's true.
Yeah, Wolf's hitting on the flavor of the treasure goes a long way.
Sometimes that's all you have.
Players remember the treasure more than the encounter sometimes.
Yeah.
They remember the whole
It's because it's on
adventure
this.
and I found this.
It's like a photograph. It's like taking a snapshot. I mean, it's that sword. Oh yeah, remember how I got this sword, or remember I got this one. I mean, it's a snapshot of memory.
It's your memento from the dungeon, right? It's like, oh, we went to the souvenir shop and I got this +4 sword.
I gotta head out to the souvenir shop. I'm sorry, folks. I can't. I had a great time.
Round of applause. Getting Ruby up here. I like this. So my biggest, when I'm thinking about dungeon design, my biggest thing is I really want the creatures, the monsters, whatever that live in there. I want it to feel like they've thought about how they were going to defend themselves in this dungeon. I mean, because you got to figure that in a dungeon, there's crazy adventures coming in all the time. There's other monsters coming in from other levels, and a lot of times you'll see something like, for instance, one of the things I hate the most is like, you find the dragon in this room. The room is 40 feet by 40 feet, and the dragon's huge, and he can't even fly, and he can't fit through the door, and you're like, why the heck would a dragon put themselves in here? I like to think a little bit about the structure and how to build the dungeons so that, like for instance, at my level with the goblins, I wanted to think, okay, what would goblins do to make it really hard on everybody else that's trying to take over the goblins, the goblin area? They would use their small size to their advantage. They'd use their dark vision to their advantage. They would try to do things to give themselves that advantage. And that's what creatures would do that they lived in a dungeon. They would, you find, and then what I hate is like, the archer who's got sneak attack, has got some rogue, levels and has the ability to sneak attack, but he, you can corner him in the room so he can't use his bow without an attack of opportunity because he's got nothing set up to give himself an advantage, to be able to fire from hiding or whatever. It's a lot of times people don't think through the strategies of why a room would be set up the way it is to give an advantage to the person that lives there. And so I always try to do that when I'm, even if I'm using something that's pre-written, I try to think through a little bit. And sometimes I'll change the room to make it more advantageous for the people there, because they would do that. They would put caltrops on the floor. They would do something, if their goal is to slow your advance so they can use some powers that require distance, then they would do things to make it so that happened. And so try to give those kind of thoughts. And then just the kind of, one of my other big things is I love to give players options so that when they come into a dungeon level, they don't have to, they can fight it, they can negotiate with it, they can go on to the next level if they want to. I mean, they have these options, they have to gauge the situation and figure out the best way for them to go about it and what makes sense for their characters and stuff. And so if you write it in this way that assumes they're going to do one thing, it makes it hard when the group comes in and they want to be diplomatic or they want to make allies or whatever. And if you haven't given thought to that, then it makes it harder on the GM. And so I try to give them lots of ways to attack it, usually an extra entrance or something, so if they want to go to the back. I mean, one of my favorite adventures I ran was the third of the slave lords ones where one of my characters discovered the back entrance and they went through the whole adventure backwards. And it was really fun, you know, it was just like they beat up the big bad and they came in all the way through the back. So, I mean, and that's fun, that makes memorable occasions, and so I try to put those kind of things into a dungeon.
One of my aphorisms that gets quoted a lot is you know what a sandbox is, you know, where it's a completely player-driven thing. A sandbox is actually an area where the DM has covered up all the railroad tracks. Okay, so you can't hear the whistle anymore. They don't know. It's all planned out depending on what their initial choice is. But take away the illusion of it being a railroad job, and you put it in their hands.
Well, you have to be a railroad in some ways because you're writing. You're writing
Right.
something, right? I mean, you're writing structure, but of course you can ignore it. That's
So
the great
it's
thing
all
about being a
illusion
GM. You
to
can
make. Yeah, exactly.
James, in the interest of getting some questions, and if the rest of us can kind of do it quickly.
I'll go really quick. Yeah, I just think the role playing is the important part. So make your players' choices have consequences, and remember that monsters are, if they're intelligent, are people too. And so I love the moral ambiguity. I love when you kill the big monster and then its baby walks out of the next room and goes, "Mama." Like I think that the more you can shame your players, teach your players, like really play with their emotions. My favorite games are the ones where the players don't even get around to fighting during the session. They just sit there and have all these inter-party dynamics. And as a GM, if I can sit back and do nothing while they play and have a great time, I've won. You know, it's like I yeah.
Stop fetishizing dragons. So there are these giant monsters, and they're big, and they're et cetera, et cetera. They've got all these abilities. They're huge. They're bosses. No. We've got stats for like dragons that are like sizes of cats, that are like the sizes of cows, so on and so forth. I'm looking at my level, and I'm looking at the other levels. There's not a dragon in this dungeon. Like, these are super cool, iconic monsters. Why aren't we putting a dragon in here? And it's not that, you know, I'm saying make them as pervasive as kobolds or goblins or whatever have you, but also don't, you know, so often we end up being like, oh no, we have to save the dragon for the adventure that's all about going to kill the dragon. Or you could not. Or the dragon could just have a reasonable reason for like living in this area. What comes cool with that is first, when the PCs turn the corner, and actually, what you probably don't want them to do is just turn the corner and be like, bam, there's a dragon there. But once the PCs start getting hints that there's a dragon in the area, immediately it starts getting revved up like, oh, there's a dragon coming. They don't get that reaction, or USGM don't get that reaction from like, oh, there's a Gorgon coming, oh, there's a gelatinous ooze coming. But, oh, there's a dragon coming ends up being pretty cool. So try working those in a little more. We've got a bunch of varieties of sizes and so on and so forth, and a lot of them have some really neat like themes and elemental themes and whatnot, which is why in my fire level, it's like, I'm going through, it's like Thokwa, Lame, Zorn, Salamander, Magma Dragon. Oh, that's pretty cool. But then kind of tying in with the treasure element, well, every dragon has a hoard, and a hoard's never just like 14 copper pieces. Horde always has some cool stuff.
It's the saddest dragon ever.
Well, but even then, there's even some tricks that you get to play with the Horde, because even though treasure has a GP value to it, not everything in a dragon's hoard needs to end up being treasure. Cursed items, for example, are real shiny, but they don't have any gold piece value associated to them. The other thing is artifacts also don't have a gold piece value associated with them. And while you probably don't want to be handing out an artifact, sometimes you can spin it in such a way that the PCs don't even know what they have, or you even end up just giving them a key or something that ends up unlocking something that's really significant for the player. So, yeah, they take the dragons down off the shelf.
Literally with Pathfinder Battles miniature.
You're the boss. Yeah, that's right. My tip is a little bit geared more toward people who are writing stuff for publication than just something in the home campaign. But I think it can't be understated how valuable playtesting dungeons are. I understand Nick's philosophy, but there's a huge difference between what works in theory and what works in practice. And you're going to learn a lot of stuff that you can cover when you actually run it in play. People are going to ask you questions that you never thought of, no matter how much time you spent thinking about it. 5 or 6 brains are better than one, no matter how smart you think you are. And so I found that to be extraordinarily useful, and there is no question to me that my dungeon got better after every single time that I ran it. Because that's, for a lot of you probably aren't writing for publication, I guess really quickly I'll also say the other tip that I would have is it's really important to make sure that the different levels in your dungeon exist within the ecosystem of the entire dungeon, and that it's, you can have a key in room A for a door in room B, but you can also have a key in room A for a door 3 levels lower on the dungeon. You can have an adventurer who's been separated from his group who's now on another level, and you can try to reunite them. I think with this project, with all of us working, more or less in a vacuum, a lot of that's going to fall on the developer to draw in some of those connections. But a lot of us even just kind of threw some of that stuff in our levels and said, I'm not sure exactly how this will connect to another level, but here, make sure this item is going to be on a different level so that they have it by the time they get here or whatever. So think not just about the individual level, but the levels above it and below it and how it all fits together. We had Rich Baker join us a little bit late. So Rich, I'd love it if you could kind of get up to where the rest of us are. So to introduce yourself briefly and familiarize people if they're not already with some of the stuff that you've done in gaming, and then talk a little bit about your level.
Okay.
And then maybe a tip on dungeon design in general.
Okay. My name is Rich Baker. I've been around the gaming biz for a fair while. I started with TSR all the way back in 1991. Worked on 2nd edition D&D and wrote a bunch of stuff in Dark Sun back in the day, the Birthright campaign setting. Worked a lot on 3rd edition D&D. I like to say, when I'm not feeling terribly humble, that every time in this fine country of ours that a barbarian flies into a rage, that was me. Every time in this fine country of ours that a paladin smites evil, that was me. But since then, I worked with at WotC until let me see, just December 2011. Parted way with WotC's. I am now working on Pathfinder Online for Goblin Works, sister company of Paizo. And on the side, because I guess I just had too much time, evenings and weekends, decided to start up my own little gig with Sasquatch Game Studio. And we are launching a new campaign setting of our own for Pathfinder, for 4th edition D&D, and also the new 13 Days game called Primeval Fool. So I'm very excited about that, and if you want to hear more about it, I'll be delighted to tell you more when we wrap up here. My level in the Emerald Spire, first of all, I do want to say, I had the rare, and as far as I know, unique privilege of actually seeing everybody else's level, because I was the guy who put together the framework and started everyone off on their own levels. I was wounded a little bit when Erik remarked that, because we'd all worked in the vacuum, and it was like, oh shoot, that was on me. I should have made sure these guys.
Well, we were all writing at the same time, so
yes,
we had framework.
But I was
we
like,
talked earlier about the framework.
Yeah.
Two of us talked too.
Yeah, I wish I'd been able to plug you guys in more with each other, because that would have been awesome. The very fun thing I found about this whole process, by the way, was because everyone knew that they were going into a book that had a lot of other, frankly, name authors in it, everyone really kind of felt they had to bring their A game. It's like, they better not mail this in, because, if I mail it in, but I know that, Erik and James and Wes and Lisa and Frank is writing this adventure too. Holy cow! I better be on the ball. I got to do something that really, really shines. So I feel like everyone was really kind of spurring themselves in a lot of ways, way harder than I would have been jabbing them to try and bring their best stuff to this. And I think it's actually been very exciting to see what people have been doing to really try to. You all really been trying to one up each other on creativity and no one's ever seen this before. I'm gonna look.
Listen up here, new guys.
Yeah.
A game.
Don't tell Nick that.
I can do a non-Euclidean now.
So that's been very fun to see this sort of this effort to really kind of yeah, everyone's been stepping up and trying to really hit one out of the park, and that's been a lot of fun to see. My own level, in some ways, is actually kind of one of the tamest because it's really kind of tethered to the overall framework of the story because I very cleverly didn't tell anyone about that except myself. So we have the idea that there is this, in the Thornkeep book, there is one wizard mentioned in the context of Emerald Spire, this Numerian wizard named Clarkosh, who was very interested in mechanical things, automatons, and so forth. And because he's the one guy mentioned, it's like, all right, he needs to have his own lair, right? One of these levels needs to be Clarkosh's lair. I'll take that on. I invented the guy, I put him in the Emerald Spire. I better do something with him. So Clarkosh's level is essentially a clockwork level in which a lot of the passageways and intersections have variable configurations. Because once again, I felt like I had to bring my A game and do something that people didn't try to do very often. So the fun thing about this level is as you navigate it, you realize that there are many places where you actually have to set the one corridor in this configuration to go through to get to the place where you set the other corridor in its other configuration, and then come back again and reset the corridor you just went through, because now you actually need to have it open again the other way to go to the one you just opened. So there's should be a little bit of fun navigating and puzzle solving. But once again, your mileage may vary whether you consider that fun or at least the fist fights at the table. But Clarkosh is kind of fun. I played around with a couple of fun templates and ideas for some of the critters he's got. So there's a lot of metal-clad monsters in that level, and it feels very kind of techno-magic type stuff, which is very Numerian, I think. And that's essentially my level in a nutshell. As far as the dungeon design tip, boy, I kind of came in halfway through. I don't know what to really do. I actually find writing adventures, this is going to be a little bit discouraging, but it's a really difficult form to write in. I've written a lot of novels, and here's the thing. When I write a novel, if my character is confronted with a choice, I know which way he goes.
Yeah.
Right? It's like, well, if you go left or right, I'm going to go right. And as a writer, I never have to worry about what's behind the left-hand door ever again. Doesn't matter. My character never went there. It's gone. It's behind him. You're never going to see it again.
If you give players an option of A, B, or C, they'll be like, I pick X. Yeah. And then you're like, damn it. I didn't plan for X.
Right. That's why X is actually it.
Yeah.
When I write the novel, I never have to worry about, okay, we disguise ourselves like orcs and we pretend to sign up. Okay, my character just didn't ever think of that. I never had to deal with it. But in an adventure, especially one that has a little bit of a sandbox element where there are multiple ways to approach it, you have to kind of leave yourself some room and have at least half an idea of what's going to happen with that. I find really what I try to do is simply write about the 2 or 3 most likely contingencies that I can foresee, and then if anything goes deeper down, the very powerful tool that we have in the tabletop business that we don't have in the online business is there is a human being who can adapt and react to what's going on. And if there's something that's not actually covered specifically the scenario, a good DM can look at it and say, yeah, it didn't say anything about disguising yourself as orcs and signing on, but I think it might work. It says right here, this orc is very nearsighted. You might not be able to tell. And this guy's got a great bluff check. I guess they might pull it off. And the advantage of the tabletop RPG is if you just give the DM enough, just a little bit of help and enough of the background and the scenario and a bit of an understanding of what's going on and why, which, by the way, Frank's level is great for. Frank really spent a lot of time explaining exactly what's going on and why. So if the party comes in and tries Frank's level 8 different ways for Sunday, there should be enough there that at the end can say, okay, I see how they're going to do this. I know which way to go. So I guess that would be my advice, is don't beat yourself up trying to cover all possibilities because you will make yourself crazy doing that. Pick a couple of likely ones and then just provide enough backgrounds that a good DM can see where it's going and make something happen.
Awesome. So you heard from all of us. I'd love to spend the last half hour of the panel opening it up for questions. If you would do us a favor, because there's not that much time, If you could address your question to a specific panelist, that'd be great. If you'd rather just kind of throw it open, I'm going to let one or maybe two people jump on it, and then we're going to move on. So we'll start with a question here.
Okay. If I'm a dungeon designer, or if I'm a mastermind building the dungeon, I have something valuable that I want to put a trap in front of it. Why is a trap anything other than I will kill you and discover you no save? I'm not like burning hands at second level.
Those are expensive to make.
But if I'm going to create a trap,
Well, killing is subjective, right? I mean, the goblin might think that the little trap filled with fire that pours on your head, well, that'll kill a goblin. It might not kill a hero. So sometimes it's just a matter of perspective. And sometimes, they just don't have the means to build, you open up this door and 14 Baylors are summoned and they eat you, right? Maybe all they got are a bunch of rocks. It's the best they can do. Deterrent,
I mean, I think that's a key point there is also what was being mentioned before is what do these people have to work with? It's very easy for us to say, oh, there should be no save. How do you make a thing that has no save? Again, if all they've got is rocks and darkness, they are going to make the best trap they can make out of rocks and darkness.
Oh no, I got hit with the darkness.
This might sound a little funny too, but I mean, just look at the movie Home Alone. Dude's trying to keep robbers out of his house. He wasn't trying to murder them. It's just the sort of thing where it's like, if all it takes to keep the person out is a paint can in the face and then they leave, well, then you don't even have to deal with the cleanup of the body.
Basically a goal. All right, another question? Yes, sir.
This is the key. This dungeon.
Which key? I'm right between two.
No.
Baker.
Sorry.
Keith Baker.
That's Keith Baker, I'm Rich Baker. No relation.
This is to Rich Baker. I'm sorry.
There you go. No worries. Okay, good. All good. If you just said this is to Baker, that would confuse us.
What's the question?
Okay, sorry. The question is, this seems to have a lot of really interesting history and backstory and details for the players to discover. How do you make sure, or at least give them a good chance to discover all these histories and backstories and details that you're really excited about, explains why all this and why the plate's covered in yellow mold, without just leaving a bunch of journals lying everywhere?
Certainly, anytime you can create NPC interactions, right, that's a good way to do it, right? If there's somebody there that you can talk to who can tell you some of this stuff, that is probably preferable to just finding random journal entry number 75, which, because one of the tricks is, in this context of this particular dungeon, there's a lot of people who don't, or that in the dungeon that don't know why it's there because it's really old, and don't really understand the powers that they're dabbling with. In the context of the Emerald Spire, the people who really understand what they're dealing with, probably the Serpentmen on Chris, actually your Serpentmen are nuts. The Serpentmen on Jason's level, right? They probably have a good idea what's going on. Certainly the bad guy on Erik's level knows what's going on. Not a lot of other bad guys here really understand what's at stake. Some of the deeper levels, James's level certainly, they have a pretty good idea what the stakes are. We have a couple of elements that we sort of seeded through. For example, I'm a big fan of the old Journey to the Center of the Earth story. So we wanted to create a sort of Arnie Sacknussen character who's actually been through a lot of the dungeon and deliberately left marks for herself, or evidence for herself, to kind of figure out how to get through, how to find her way back. And, that's a little bit better than just random journal entry number 75. You actually can have a face and a name and at least a personality to that experience.
Yeah, I think it's just clues. Sometimes just piecing together clues, leaving little tidbits so people say, oh, okay, I think I figured that out.
Not allowed to sell for development, include more ways for people to find out what's going on here.
Well, I've got these clues in like the architecture,
inscriptions on walls, things like that.
Yeah, we hit this problem early on when Gary and I did Temple of Elemental Evil, the original. There's all these different bits and pieces that then start coming together. You find out who's in the basement, etc. But we hit this head on. How do you convey all that in a method that is still within the context of the verisimilitude of the setup and so forth, instead of just coarsely, bluntly shoving in your face stuff without a good rationale? So it's a challenge for sure.
Another question? In the back.
One of the things I've run into with my games, specifically, this is a question, it's more of a general GM question for all of you. How do you balance, because sometimes it feels like I'm running two different games. The games when they're out in the world, they're visiting a city, they're traveling from place to place, and then it's in a dungeon. It's like almost a completely different game. They get so hyper-focused that, you know, they're running around in all different directions in the city, but all of a sudden we're in a dungeon, like there's, you know, nose to the ground, and it's like it feels like two different games almost.
And your question specifically is?
How do you find a balance to make it feel a little more cohesive?
Talk to your players. What works for your gaming group doesn't work for hers, and it doesn't work for mine. You keep lines of communication open. Now, me, before the game, we said 5-10 minutes, I just touch base. How do you like the way things are going? Which parts of this do you like more? Somebody will say, no, I want to go kill things. Come on, I had a rough week. And maybe that week we'll just go kill things. And then in the next week, you know, so it can change from day to day, week to week as well as. But my biggest tip, talk to your players, not the characters, just, you know, and not just social, how's the wife and kids, blah, blah. Find out what is our common goal here in this communal form. You can't hardly call it a game. It breaks all the rules for what is a game, a winner, loser, etc. No, we're all on the same team, so which team wins? Duh. You know, all of us win. So within this, you see where I'm headed on this. Find out what works for you. Make it your game, your group's game, and customize it for them. If they want more running around out there, more role-playing and more objective, weird, world-saving goals, cool. Head that direction. If they just want to kill something and blow off some steam, great. Find the balance.
And that's the hardest thing, I think, as a GM to do, because, I mean, your group goal is really to give your players the game they want. And a good GM, you know, can vary their style and to play into what the players want. Because that's when you get the people that keep coming back and stay with you forever and talk about those games forever, because you're giving them what they want. And the best way to do that is listen.
One of the GM's jobs that we rarely talk about is we're social managers too. You know, we have those quiet players, we make eye contact, we bring them out a little more, and the guy to your right who wants to sneak peeks at your notes and always has something to say, shut up, but doing it politely, you know. And so part of that social management is finding out what the right level is for everybody as a group.
You might also try putting some dungeons under cities. So, you know, the Freeport setting is built on the ruins of the Superman Empire, so there's all sorts of stuff underground. So you can have an adventure where it's like, oh, you're out and about the city, and then 10 minutes later, it's like, oh, now you're exploring a catacomb, you know. And then
you're shopping and you fall to the floor.
Yeah. And, you know, I tend not to make those too long, you know. So it's like you can go through 8-10 rooms or whatever, and then you're up on the street again, and so there'd be less disconnect from being on the street and being in a dungeon.
Yeah, or vice versa, actually put some cities in dungeons, right?
Yeah.
That are societies, places where you stop and say, oh, we're not actually in tactical move 5 feet and kill something mode.
Yeah.
There's something I got to talk to, there's an interaction, there's a social environment here, I need to actually stop and engage.
I mean, I think just coming right back to Frank's point, I mean, that's the point, is it doesn't have to be, is this a choice of dungeon or city? You can make your dungeon more like a city, or you can make your city more like a dungeon. It's understanding what is the experience your player is going to enjoy. What did they want out of this evening?
Another question in front here.
Question for Erik.
Okay.
Is there a given story motivation for why the character is going to the dungeon and making it all the way to the bottom? Like, Burl had the one ring, beat the finish of the Mordor instead of saying, wow, this sucks.
I think that really the thing for me, as far as I understand it, and I think what my personal motivation would be for the dungeon is just the mystery of it all. You know, you have this 10,000-year-old edifice, you have this mysterious emerald, you know, Spire literally in every dungeon. You have these powerful factions that are trying to gain control of it, even if they don't fully understand it. And as you get lower in the dungeon, as Rich says, you're learning more and more about it. And I think that the, you know, why, the question of why, what is this, I think is the most compelling thing. There are some other things as well. You know, I mean, there are some hooks that lead you into the dungeon. While we're developing it, we'll be doing even more. And some of that is going to involve, you know, Rich is the one person on this panel who's really kind of read everything, you know, and then we're also going to be going through it on the Paizo side and doing that as well. And one of the things we're going to be looking at is what are some appropriate adventure hooks to get you in there. One of the things Rich asked me to put at my level, for example, is in the Thorn Keep book. There's the Golden Fire Adepts, is that the name of the group?
Yeah.
And they've got a couple of missing members, you know, and it said these people just disappeared a while ago in the region of Emerald Spire, and Rich said, hey, why don't you put one of those in there, right? So when you find her, you know, you could perhaps reunite her with her companions or report on her situation or what have you. One storybook might be, you know, the leader of this organization asks you explicitly to go in and find her. It could be that the Hell Knights in Wes's level contact players and say, our detachment that went in there 3 weeks ago went silent, you know, please find him. And all you need to do is give people a couple of reasons to go into the adventure, because once they're in the adventure, then they're getting cross links to other things, and it just keeps growing and growing. So I think part of that will develop as we develop the adventure, but there will be explicit hooks into the adventure, but I also just think that the overall mystery of the Emerald Spire itself is the most important one.
Yeah, I think just following the Spire down.
What's at the bottom? I think that's a really huge question. And it turns out what's at the bottom is going to be one of the biggest mysteries that we've ever revealed about the world of Valerian. So it's got a great payoff by James Jacobs, the guy who, after editing Dungeon and virtually every, you know, volume of Pathfinder to date, has probably got more experience writing and editing and developing adventures than anyone who's ever lived, I would imagine. So, you know, that's quite a prize to get to the bottom there. So
yeah, it turns out his level's not half bad.
Yeah. Question in the front here.
Sort of, this is a general. This is a huge dungeon. It's going to take them months of game time to get through. Any advice on things like, you know, I mean, if are other you know, would other monsters move in, restocking the thing? Any advice on that sort of?
So one of the things that I did at the top level is because of the darkness, it's kind of got a funkiness about it. So like a lot of creatures steer clear of it because it's just kind of weird feeling. It's not natural. So I don't think there'll be a lot of like random stuff coming in unless it digs in from down below. You know, that could happen. That's how a lot of the serpent folk and things got in there. Is you know they discovered it from the below part, not from the top.
Yeah, the serpent folk on my level actually have a tunnel going to the Darklands, so more things can come in that way.
So are you concerned that, like, once you've gotten down to level 8, when you want to go back up?
Well, there is that.
Rich, you want to tell us a little bit about the transportation element of the dungeon?
One of the things about Thornkeep was, you know, it's well known, and you know, it's right in the middle of town, and the parties coming out, hauling all this loot, and you know, after a couple of levels, they're like the strongest people in the town.
I think in some ways that speaks to Frank's idea early on about rival adventuring parties and things. You know, and I think that we'll include some advice on that kind of stuff in the book as well. I saw a couple more hands. We've got about 8 minutes left before I've got to gavel this thing. So yes, sir.
You're all building an epic place. This is linked to the online game that's being developed right now. Will there be a link where will those maps be used in the game, something like that, or is this completely?
It's an interesting question, and I think that, I think somewhere down the line we'd love to you know do something with this in Pathfinder Online. Right now, our goal with Pathfinder Online is to create a sandbox game and give the players the tools to tell stories, you know, make stories amongst themselves. Building a dungeon the size of the Emerald Spire in the online game is a massive undertaking of manpower hours and stuff. So I think it's something you might see later on down the line. It's not something will be there when it launches. You know, maybe we might, you know, at some point we might, you know, open up maybe the top level and stuff like that, you know, and then who knows, maybe we might, you know, release a.
Really, Lucy, you want them to build your level first?
Yeah. You know, it's good to be queen.
Yeah, it's also true that what will make a good level for an online game is very different from what will make a good level for a tabletop game. Yeah. Right. For amongst other things, right? You know, we have flip mats that are a wonderful resource for the game, but they actually do kind of channel us into certain design constraints we have to acknowledge. And if you were to run around in an area the size of a foot mat in an online game, you'd be like, this is the size of a phone booth. Why am I turning a corner? I mean, yeah, down the road. That was it. Walking. Where are the majestic vistas? Where are the long, sweeping, epic halls? Right? I mean,
my understanding is that my understanding, and Rich and Lisa can correct me if I'm wrong, but my understanding is that the Emerald Spire itself, the outer works of it, are going to probably be visible in the game. You'll be
At some point.
to see it at some point.
Yeah.
You know, so and maybe it'll be sealed at first, and then if they get further along, and that's what people want. That's the thrust of the development. Maybe but,
Yeah, I would
right
not
now it's-
expect to get into the place and adding a 3D version of the click map, but that would be cool to at least, even just that.
Yeah. I mean, it's an important part of the region, and in that regard, I suspect that it will tie into the lore of the video game.
it'd be a lot more likely to see things that are perhaps inspired by the tabletop levels. So, like, if we ever got to a spot where we were doing like the Farkash level, there might be like a big clockwork theme that we would do at that point. But it would probably not look anything like the map of the original one,
Yeah.
right? It's just two different mediums.
Yeah, different, yeah, exactly.
We got time for one more question. Anyone? It's got to be a good one. Yes, sir.
This is mostly for Rich, but it's possible that some of the rest of you might jump on. There's a very linear sort of progression through most dungeons, and we talked a little bit about skipping one of the Serpent Man levels, but is there a lot of that where you can move between layers in a more organic fashion, like skip up to, down to, whatever, or is it just very like 1, 2, 3?
That's a great question.
Yeah, it's easy to retrace your steps. We have, Wes was mentioning this a minute ago, we have the idea that there's actually something called a Spire transport token, which is a magic item that occurs and is found in a few different spots in the dungeon. And with that, once you know the address, if you will, of a level, you can just go to that level by literally just touching the Spire, and it'll pop you to the Spire's area of the level that you wanted to go to. And originally I had been thinking that this would be the easy way to retrace your steps to get out of the dungeon when you wanted to leave and rest up, and then get back to the spot where you explored down to later on. But now I'm starting to think it might be a lot of fun if you actually found the addresses for levels you ought not to go to yet. That just sounds like a lot of mischief and mayhem that we should not deny players.
Certainly on my level, that is the room you least want to go to.
So here in the chair.
Yeah. Like in Arathamon's lab, like with Santa Claus.
Yeah.
How about death? I think that's probably a pretty good place to end this. So thank you guys so much for coming. Thank you very much. We'll see you here next year when we release the book. Hopefully we'll do some kind of fun signing or something. Yeah. And we'll see you then.